Carl Jung taught us that the path toward emotional healing begins when we dare to prioritize ourselves in a world that constantly pushes us to look outward in search of others' validation and to fit into molds that are not our own. Rarely do we stop to ask ourselves, what do I really want? What do I need to feel complete? The answer to these questions is not found in the opinions of others or in external approval, but in a deep connection with our own being. When you decide to prioritize yourself, it does not mean that you are being selfish. On the contrary, it means that you are finally paying attention to the most important person in your life, yourself. Jung warns us that many of our emotional wounds come from living in constant disconnection from our essence. We spend years molding ourselves into something, yet here is the key. Everything we repress, everything we deny about ourselves, does not disappear. It becomes a shadow that sooner or later finds a way to manifest in our lives. Perhaps you have noticed it in relationships that seem to repeat over and over, in patterns of self-sabotage, or in a constant feeling of dissatisfaction. We ask ourselves, why does life not change? Why do we find ourselves trapped in the same conflicts? Without realizing that the answer is not out there but within us. Jung teaches us that healing begins when we stop searching externally and dare to explore our own inner world. Think of your life as a reflection of your inner state. If you constantly surround yourself with people who do not value you, if you feel that your energy is drained in toxic relationships or in situations that do not nurture you, it is not a coincidence. It is your unconscious showing you that something within you needs attention. The question is, are you willing to listen? Most people avoid this process because facing oneself is not easy. It means confronting our wounds, our insecurities, and accepting that many times we are the ones who allow the pain to persist. But here is where true transformation occurs. When you prioritize yourself, you begin to realize that you cannot heal if you continue to surround yourself with what hurts you. Emotional healing does not occur in toxic environments. It does not happen when you keep allowing the same old things. Jung spoke of the importance of individuation, a process in which we free ourselves from external influences to discover our own identity. This does not mean distancing yourself from the world, but rather ceasing to depend on it to define who you are. How many times have you felt that your happiness depends on someone else's validation? How many times have you allowed the fear of rejection to prevent you from doing what you truly desire? When you begin to prioritize, something changes within you. You no longer accept emotional crumbs, and you no longer seek others to fill the voids that only you can heal. You come to realize that you do not need to fit into a mold, because what you truly need is to connect with yourself. And when this happens, healing flows without barriers. The relationships that once drained you begin to fade away. The situations that once caused you anguish lose their power over you, not because the world has changed, but because you have changed. You have stopped searching outside for what was always within you, and here is where true freedom arises. When you understand that your well-being depends on no one but yourself. But this process does not happen overnight. It requires courage. It requires patience. It means learning to say no, learning to set boundaries, and above all, learning to listen to yourself. How many times have you ignored your intuition out of fear of disappointing others? How many times have you sacrificed your peace to please someone else? Jung tells us that the price of ignoring ourselves is too high. It is paid with anxiety, dissatisfaction, and a life that does not feel our own. When you decide to prioritize yourself, you start to notice something curious. The world no longer seems so chaotic. Relationships no longer feel like a constant struggle. Why? Because you have stopped fighting against yourself. Emotional healing is not a destination you arrive at, but a journey you traverse day by day. It is the act of choosing yourself over and over again, without guilt or fear. And when you finally do, everything changes. Not because the world has changed, but because now you see it with different eyes. The peace you were seeking outside was always within you. You just needed to remember that you deserve something more. You deserve a life in which you do not have to ask permission to be yourself. This is only the beginning. True transformation occurs when you decide to take the first step, when you choose to leave behind what no longer resonates with you and allow yourself to discover who you truly are. It is not easy, but it is the only path toward an authentic and complete life. And the question is, are you ready to take it? When you begin to prioritize, you start to notice more clearly the dynamics that before went unnoticed. Suddenly, you realize that certain relationships only worked because you were the one making all the effort, that there were situations where you gave more than you received, and that many times you endured the unbearable simply for fear of being alone. But when you decide to choose yourself, something within you breaks, a necessary rupture, a crack through which the light of consciousness finally enters. Jung taught us that everything we repress finds a way to manifest in our lives in one form or another. If we do not listen to our needs, we end up projecting them onto people who reinforce that belief. And if we avoid facing our wounds, the world will continue to reflect them back to us again and again until we finally decide to confront them. This is the process that many avoid because it is not comfortable. It means accepting that what we have, often called love, was not love at all but attachment, that what we believed was friendship may have only been a connection based on convenience, and that most of the decisions we have made have been driven by the fear of not being enough. But here's the key. When you start to prioritize, you stop settling. You stop negotiating with your peace. You stop sustaining the unsustainable. And then something happens that terrifies many. You begin to lose people, not because you have changed, but because you have stopped tolerating what you used to endure. People who once seemed fundamental in your life start to distance themselves, some without even giving explanations. But what at first appears as a loss soon becomes liberation, because for every door that closes, a space opens for something more authentic. This process, although necessary, is not easy. The unconscious resists change because it seeks the security of the known. Although the past may have been painful, it remains familiar, and the familiar gives us a false sense of control. That is why many people prefer to remain in situations that hurt them, in relationships that consume them, because the fear of the unknown seems greater than the suffering they already know. But here is where true transformation occurs, when you dare to let go. Letting go does not mean forgetting overnight or pretending that nothing matters. It means accepting that you cannot force anyone to stay, that you cannot make someone value you if they do not want to, and that the only person responsible for your well-being is yourself. At this point, the world divides into two types of people: those who continue searching outside for what they can only find within, and those who decide to confront themselves and begin their own journey of healing. Jung tells us that the path toward wholeness is not easy, but it is the only one worth taking. The path of authenticity, the path that allows you to be who you truly are without apologies or fear. When you decide to prioritize yourself, you begin to notice something powerful. The quality of your relationships changes. People who were only in your life for their own interests disappear, and in their place begin to appear those who truly value your presence. Relationships where there is reciprocity, where affection is not measured in sacrifices but in mutual support. Because when you value yourself, you stop accepting less than you deserve. The problem is that most people never reach this point, because the process of letting go is painful, not only because of the loss itself, but because it forces us to confront the part of ourselves that allowed certain dynamics to persist for so long. It is easy to blame others, to say that the problem lies outside, but Jung reminds us that everything we experience is a reflection of our inner world, and until we do the work to heal from within, we will keep repeating the same patterns over and over again. This is where the concept of the shadow comes. Jung said that we all carry within us parts that we do not want to acknowledge. Fear, insecurities, hidden desires, emotions that we repress because we were told they were unacceptable. But denying our shadow does not make it disappear. In fact, the more we ignore it, the more power it gains over us. The shadow does not vanish because you ignore it. It hides in the relationships you choose, in the conflicts you experience, in the emotions you struggle to control. When you prioritize yourself, you begin to become aware of your shadow. You start to notice your own patterns, the ways you self-sabotage, the times you say yes when you really want to say no. And at that moment, you have two options: continue living in unconsciousness or start taking control of your life. This is the point at which many people stop because facing the shadow is uncomfortable. It means acknowledging that we have allowed situations that hurt us, that we have given too much in places where we were not valued, that we have accepted less than we deserve. But here is the truth. The pain of facing reality is temporary. The pain of living in denial lasts a lifetime. The path to emotional healing begins when you decide to see yourself with honesty, not from judgment, but from compassion. Jung said that we cannot heal what we do not acknowledge. We cannot change what we are not willing to accept. But in the moment, you decide to look at yourself without masks, without excuses, something inside you changes. It is here where true healing begins, when you stop searching for someone to blame and start taking responsibility for your own power. When you realize that life is not something that happens to you but something you create with every decision you make, when you understand that you do not need anyone's approval to live an authentic life. From that moment on, transformation becomes inevitable. You begin to attract people and situations that reflect your new level of consciousness. You stop striving to fit in where you never belonged. The anxiety about the future dissolves because you trust in your ability to navigate life from your truth. But the most beautiful thing of all is the peace that arises when you finally choose yourself. That feeling of freedom that can only be experienced when you no longer depend on anything external to feel complete. That certainty that everything you need is already within you. The question is, are you willing to go through the process? Are you ready to let go of what weighs you down and open yourself up to the possibility of something better? It will not be easy, but I assure you it will be worth it. Because when you truly decide to prioritize, emotional healing flows without barriers, and the world stops feeling like a hostile place and becomes a reflection of your own well-being. When you begin to prioritize, something inevitably happens. You start to change, and when you change, the people around you react. Some celebrate it, others question it, and some will try to make you feel guilty for no longer being the person they once knew. This is one of the most difficult moments in the process because you will realize that not everyone is ready to accept your transformation. It is here where many people retreat, return to old habits, go back to relationships that no longer fulfill them, accept conditions that make them feel small, all out of fear of losing what is familiar. But here is the truth. If you have to diminish yourself to fit into someone's life, that place was never meant for you. Jung teaches us that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, is not a path that everyone will understand, but it does not matter whether others understand it or not. What really matters is whether you are willing to move forward even if that means walking alone for a while. The fear of being alone is one of the greatest traps in personal growth. We have been taught to believe that being alone is synonymous with being incomplete, with being rejected, or with having failed at something, but the reality is that loneliness is not the problem. The true problem is not knowing how to be with ourselves. Jung said that the journey toward wholeness requires a period of deep introspection during which we stop looking outside for what we can only find within, and when we learn to be at peace in our own company, we stop accepting anything just to avoid the discomfort of silence. At this point, many people experience what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a transitional period in which everything old falls away but the new has not yet arrived. It is a void, a feeling of uncertainty in which everything you believe to be secure begins to crumble, and it is here that most people give up because the mind seeks immediate answers. It wants certainties. It wants to cling to something. But growth does not work that way. True transformation occurs when you allow yourself to be in that void, without trying to fill it with the same old things. When you resist the temptation to return to what is familiar, simply because it is comfortable. When, instead of seeking distractions, you decide to confront what you truly feel. This is the moment when many people discover that much of their identity was built around others, that their value depended on being needed, on being accepted, on being recognized, and when all those external expectations disappear, they are faced with a big question. Who am I when no one else is watching? For Jung, the answer to this question lies in the integration of our whole being, not only the part we show to the world, but also our shadows, our wounds, our deepest truths. When you stop running away from yourself, when you dare to look at your life honestly, something changes. The need to please disappears. The urgency to fit in dissolves, and for the first time you begin to feel free. At that point, the world will test you. Situations from the past will return to see if you have truly learned the lesson. Relationships you thought were over will knock on your door again. People who once manipulated you will try to do so once more. And it is then that you will know if you have truly changed. Not because the world looks different, but because now you respond differently. You no longer need to explain yourself. You no longer feel the obligation to convince anyone of your worth. You understand that not all connections are forever, and that losing some people is not a tragedy but an act of alignment. The energy you once spent trying to be enough for others, you now invest in yourself. And although it may feel strange at first, it is the greatest act of self-love you can commit. When you decide to prioritize, you begin to notice patterns you previously ignored. You realize that life is not a series of random events, but a mirror of your own consciousness. Everything you see outside is a reflection of what you carry within. Jung speaks of the principle of projection. That which bothers us in others, that which we admire or reject, is nothing more than a manifestation of aspects of ourselves that we have yet to recognize. If you constantly attract relationships where you feel undervalued, if you always end up in situations where you have to try excessively hard, ask yourself, which part of me still believes I am not enough? Because the answer is not in the external world, but in the relationship you have with yourself. When you do this inner work, something incredible happens. Life stops feeling like a struggle. The anxiety about the future dissolves because you trust in your ability to adapt to any circumstance. Relationships cease to be a source of conflict and instead become a space for mutual growth. And most importantly, you reclaim your power. This does not mean that everything will be perfect, that you will never again feel fear or insecurity. It means that now you have the tools to prevent those emotions from controlling you. That instead of acting from a place of lack, you begin to act from abundance. That instead of desperately seeking love, you realize that love has always been within you. He taught that life is not about eliminating pain, but about learning to integrate it. That true healing is not about escaping our wounds, but about embracing them and giving them a new meaning. When you allow yourself to do this, you stop living in the past, you stop worrying about the future, and you begin to experience the only reality that truly matters, the present. It is here that peace is found, not in the absence of problems, but in the certainty that, whatever happens, you have the capacity to sustain yourself, not through others' approval, but through the trust that at the end of the day you are enough just as you are. This is the gift of prioritizing. You not only recover your energy, your time, and your peace, but you also recover something even more valuable, your authenticity. Because when you decide to stop being what the world expects of you and begin to be who you truly are, emotional healing flows without barriers, and life finally becomes a reflection of your own truth. When you finally decide to prioritize, you realize that much of your suffering did not come from the external world, but from the stories you told yourself. Stories that made you believe that in order to be loved, you had to try harder, that in order to be accepted, you had to adapt, that in order to be valued, you had to constantly prove your usefulness. But the moment you begin to question these beliefs, you start to see the truth clearly. It was never your responsibility to carry what was not yours. Jung taught us that the collective unconscious is full of inherited patterns and beliefs that we often do not question. Ideas about love, success, happiness, loyalty, sacrifice. All of these shape us from a young age, and without realizing it, we end up repeating stories that aren't even our own. But awakening occurs when you begin to ask yourself, why do I believe what I believe? Why do I continue to sustain dynamics that hurt me? Why do I continue to tolerate the intolerable? This questioning is uncomfortable because it forces us to see that many of our choices were not truly our own, but the result of what we were taught to accept as normal. Perhaps you grew up watching your parents sacrifice themselves for others without receiving anything in return, and now you believe that love means giving everything even if it costs you your peace. Maybe you were told that if you were not productive, you were not valuable, and now feel guilty every time you allow yourself to rest. Or perhaps you learned that being strong means enduring, and that is why you find it hard to let go even when something no longer makes sense. But here is the truth. You can unlearn everything that has limited you. You can choose new paths, new beliefs, new ways of relating to yourself and to others. You are not condemned to repeat the same stories forever. Jung tells us that destiny is not something fixed, but the result of what we do with our consciousness. And when you decide to expand your consciousness, your reality changes. When you prioritize, you begin to realize that love should not be a struggle, that peace should not be an unattainable goal, that happiness should not depend on external factors, that you do not need to prove your worth because the mere fact of existing is enough. And it is here that true transformation begins. The people who once held power over you lose their control. The situations that once affected you no longer carry the same weight, not because the world has changed, but because you have changed the way you relate to it. You no longer seek to be understood by those who never tried to understand you. You no longer strive to fit in where you never belonged. You no longer insist on saving what is clearly destined to remain in the past. This is freedom, not the false freedom of doing whatever you want without consequences, but the inner freedom of knowing that you need nothing outside of you to feel complete, the certainty that you can be alone without feeling empty, the assurance that, whatever happens, you will always be okay, because you have finally learned to be with yourself. Jung said that individuation is the most important process of our existence. It is the path toward integration, toward wholeness. And although this path often involves pain, loss, and loneliness, it is the only one that can lead us to a life that is truly our own. When you begin to prioritize, when you decide to leave behind the old versions of yourself that only existed to please others, life rewards you in unexpected ways. New people enter your life. Opportunities that once seemed impossible begin to manifest. And above all, you experience a peace you have never felt before because you are no longer fighting with yourself, no longer searching outside for what was always within you. It is at this point that many people feel they have finally awakened, that life is no longer about surviving or pleasing, but about experiencing, creating, feeling, and living from a place of authenticity rather than fear. But the work does not end here. Consciousness is like a muscle. It needs to be exercised constantly because society, family, and your surroundings will continue to try to drag you into old dynamics, to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel that you are being selfish for choosing yourself. But the difference now is that you know the truth. You know there is nothing more valuable than your peace, nothing more important than your well-being, and that at the end of the day, the only decisions that truly matter are those that bring you closer to yourself. The world changes when you change. Relationships improve when you improve the relationship with yourself. Opportunities arrive when you stop acting from a place of lack and begin to act from fullness. Jung tells us that the unconscious responds to our deepest beliefs, and when you truly believe that you deserve something better, the universe takes care of showing it to you. And the question is, are you ready to see it? Are you ready to let go of everything that no longer resonates with you and open yourself up to the possibility of something completely new? It will not be easy, but I promise you it will be worth it. Because when you finally decide to prioritize, emotional healing flows. Without barriers, and life becomes what it was always meant to be, a reflection of your own truth. When you begin to live from your authenticity, something curious happens. The things that once seemed confusing become clearer. The relationships that once drained you, the situations you tolerated without question, now feel heavy. This is not a coincidence. It is growth, a sign that you are evolving and that you can no longer ignore what your soul has been trying to tell you for so long. Jung taught us that consciousness is not static but expands as we dare to look within. And when that happens, the world can no longer remain the same because what you see outside is nothing more than a reflection of what you carry inside. If there is clarity within you, it will be reflected outside. If there is chaos within you, that is what you will find in the external world. That is why, when you prioritize, you begin to attract experiences that are in tune with your new energy. You no longer need to force connections. You no longer need to beg for love. You no longer need to prove to anyone that they deserve to treat you with respect. Everything flows naturally because you are no longer operating from a place of lack, but from a place of fullness. This change does not occur overnight. There will be days when you doubt, when the temptation to return to the old ways is strong, when you feel that loneliness is too heavy. But here is where the real test comes. Are you going to betray yourself out of fear of being alone? Or are you going to hold on to your authenticity until what truly belongs to you comes your way? The unconscious always tests us, not because the universe wants to punish us, but because we need to prove to our own minds that we are ready for the next level. That is why, just when you begin to prioritize, it is possible that people from your past appear trying to drag you back into old dynamics. It is possible that life confronts you with situations that you once found difficult to handle, not because you are regressing, but because you need to reaffirm that this time you will choose differently. When you pass this test, when you decide not to return to what hurt you, something incredible happens. Your energy completely changes. You are no longer anchored in fear, no longer trapped in the need for approval, no longer waiting for others to validate your path. And when this occurs, the world responds in the most unexpected way. Opportunities begin to arise, effortlessly. The people who enter your life do so with a different intention, based on respect, admiration, and authenticity. Everything that once seemed unattainable begins to materialize, not because the world has changed, but because now you believe you deserve it. It is here that many feel they have finally awakened, that all the suffering they experienced in the past had a purpose, to bring them to this point. And although pain is never easy, when you look back you realize that every fall, every loss, every rejection was, in reality, a liberation in disguise. Jung reminds us that the unconscious does not forget, but it can heal the wounds of the past. They do not disappear, but we can change the relationship we have with them. They are no longer chains that bind us, but reminders of how far we have come. And when you stop seeing your story as a series of failures and start seeing it as a path of evolution, everything changes. The problem is that most people never reach this point. They remain trapped in resentment, nostalgia, and guilt, continuing to look back wishing that things had been different. But true power is not in what could have been, but in what you can build from now on. When you prioritize yourself, you stop living in the past. You no longer need to justify what happened, no longer need to mourn what you lost. You simply accept that everything happened as it was meant to happen, and that every experience prepared you to be the person you are today. And it is. Here that life becomes truly interesting, because when you free yourself from the weight of what was, you realize that the future is completely in your hands, that there is no fixed destiny to which you are condemned, but infinite possibilities waiting to be explored. The only question that remains is, what are you going to do with this new freedom? Are you going to continue repeating the old stories? Or are you going to dare to write something completely new? Most people choose the safe route. They prefer to remain in the familiar, even if that means giving up their happiness. But those who truly dare to prioritize themselves, those who decide to live from their authenticity without fear of the consequences, discover that life has so much more to offer than they ever imagined. Because when you choose yourself, the world also chooses you. When you value yourself, life responds by giving you more reasons to do so. When you decide to let go of what does not serve you, of what truly is meant for you, you find a way to arrive, not through magic or luck, but through the natural law of energy, as a reflection of your own growth, the inevitable result of having made the most important decision of all, the decision to be true to yourself. When you finally decide to prioritize, life takes on a completely different direction. You no longer cling to what hurts. You no longer try to convince anyone to value you. You no longer live in the uncertainty of whether you are enough, because deep within you, you know that you are enough just as you are. You do not need to search outside for what was always within you. But this does not mean that the path will always be easy. There will be days when you doubt, when the wounds of the past try to speak louder than your new consciousness. Moments when you feel tempted to return to the old ways simply because they are familiar. But the difference now is that you know the truth. You know that your peace is priceless, that your well-being is non-negotiable, that your worth does not depend on anyone's opinion, and that changes everything. Jung taught us that the purpose of life is not superficial happiness but wholeness, and wholeness is only reached when we dare to be who we truly are, without masks, without fear, without waiting for validation. It is about living authentically, embracing both our light and our shadow, and accepting that every experience, no matter how difficult, has been part of our evolution. When you reach that point, you no longer seek approval but connection. You no longer want to fit in but to belong to a space where you can be yourself. And it is here that true magic happens. Because when you live from your truth, you attract the people and opportunities that are truly aligned with you. That is why this message does not end here. If this reflection resonated with you, if at some point you felt that these words spoke directly to your soul, It is because this knowledge is not just for you. There are many people out there who also need to hear this, who are trapped in dynamics that hurt them, who continue to search outside for what they can only find within themselves. This is the moment to share this message with the world. If you have ever felt alone in this process, remember that there are thousands of people going through the same thing, and that every word you share can be the light that someone else needs to awaken. Leave your comment below and tell me which part of this message touched something within you. Tell me what you are willing to change, what relationships or habits you have decided to let go of, or simply tell me how you feel after hearing this. And if you haven't already, subscribe and activate the notification bell so that this message continues to reach more people. Every time you interact with this content, you not only help it reach a wider audience, but also become part of a movement of transformation and awareness, because the world needs more people who live authentically, more people who dare to be themselves without fear, who choose peace over chaos, who decide to prioritize themselves without guilt. If this message reached you, it is because you are ready to take the next step. Share this content, leave your comment, subscribe, and always remember this: when you prioritize yourself, emotional healing flows without barriers, and your life becomes a reflection of your own truth. See you in the next video, and until then, keep directing yourself again and again